Becoming an anchor for my family has been both a blessing and a curse. I feel ungrateful, being, I hate to say, burdened by their constant questions. How to balance?
Well, that's a good question. Delegation is good. You know, you want to, as your family becomes more competent, let's say, and more confident, you want to encourage more and more autonomy on everyone's part. And that lessens the burden that you have to bear. I mean, I think people are ultimately responsible in some ultimate sense, you know, and that's a crushing burden in a real sense. But strangely enough, even though I think that's true, there's also enough for everyone to do. And so I read this interesting idea once that God was a circle whose circumference was nowhere and whose center was everywhere. It's a very interesting conceptual image. And people are like that. It's like you have the world on your shoulders, but so does everyone else, and there's enough for everyone to do. And that's a useful thing to know, because then you can go do what you need to do, but you can really hope that and encourage everyone else to do what they have to do too. You don't have to take all that onto yourself, and you shouldn't. Also, there's a good rule of thumb, I think, which is you shouldn't do for other people what they can do for themselves, because you take it away from them. Like, you really need to know that as a therapist. So one of the things you absolutely don't want to do as a therapist, and therapy as a profession is probably going to die because of the new laws that are governing it, but I really mean that, you know, because there's these affirmation laws now where if someone comes and presents an identity, whatever that means, you have to affirm it. It's like, that's not my job. I mean that literally. It's really, really, I mean that dead seriously. It's like, it's not up to me to affirm your identity. It's also not up to me to deny it. It's like, it's your identity, man. And like, I'm not sure what it should be because you're weird and different. And so my job as a therapist, and maybe your job as a marital partner and a parent, is like, well, let's talk as honestly as we can about the situation and see if we can both feel out what your identity might optimally be in a manner we both agree on that works. And that's what you're obligated morally to do as a therapist. This whole notion of, you know, this idea that your identity is who you feel yourself to be. It's like, it's no wonder people beat you half to death for not accepting that idea, because it's so unbelievably shallow and moronic that the only way anyone would ever accept it is through the application of force. It's like, well, let's think about it for a minute. What do you mean, feel? Well, exactly what do you mean by that? You feel you're a certain way. Is that an emotion? Is it a motivation? Is it a thought? Is it a philosophical claim? Like, what is this? I'm supposed to just know what you mean when you say you feel, and then I'm supposed to accept that as, like, true. And I don't even know what you mean. How can I accept it as true? And then the next thing is, well, you have this identity. Well, let's say, I don't want to veer into the political, but I'm going to for a second because there's no way around it. I read this definition of something called demi-gender the other day, and I couldn't understand the definition at all, which I think was the point. But that's not even the point. It's like, let's say you have some really idiosyncratic identity, and maybe it's even the case that you do, because we all do to some degree, and you say, well, I'm this identity, I'm demi-gender. It's like, okay, you don't understand what an identity is. Let's start with that, because an identity is actually something you negotiate with other people. It's not something you just have and impose. Like, that's not an identity. And why? You might say, well, that's what you think because you're, you know, a prejudiced son of a bitch, and you know, you don't care about how people feel, and which actually turns out not to be true at all, because I actually really care how people feel, and too bad for me. You can say that you have that identity, but then I don't know what to do. Like, I have no idea how to play that game. I have a hard enough time with women. It's like, you're a woman. Oh my God, that's really complicated. And you're a man. Well, that's a problem too. Okay, I'm neither. It's like, I'm going to find someone else to play with, because I have no idea how to deliver to you what you want. I have absolutely no idea. I have no idea what the ground rules are at all. And if the ground rules are, you get to make the rules up as you go along, then I'm not going to play that game, partly because I can't, and partly because that will not be any fun. Because the only way I'm going to find out what you want is by being wrong all the time. And I just don't want to do that. And so, then I would say, if your identity consists of a ill-posed game that no one knows how to play and has ever played, except you now, and because no one knows how to play it, you're going to impose it by force, then I'm going to say, you know, that's really not a very good solution to the problem of identity. It's a bad solution, and that's partly why as a psychologist, I'm not very happy with this insistence on a multitude of these hypothetical identities. It's because they're not identities, because an identity is something that you negotiate with others, unless you want to be by yourself, or unless you want to force them. And if you want to be by yourself, that's not a very productive identity. And if you have to impose it by force, then that's not a very good game. So